Welcome to NoiseNet, and thanks for jumping onto this video to learn more about the business case template that we have put together to assist our customers in assessing how financially viable the use of the NoiseNet technology is for them in managing dog barking. This is going to be a very quick overview. It's really there to help people understand the definitions of our system and how you can model the process. But if you're looking for more information or more assistance, please get in touch with us, and there's a few points where we're going to bring that to you. So the starting point is generally you will receive an email from us that looks something like this. It will have two links in it, one which you have probably already found, which is the link to this video, and the second one will be a link to the actual business case template. So if you just double click or click and tap on that link, that will then open up the business case template. Now, we have those stored on our customer portal. So we have given the person that we send that email to a link to the spreadsheet. If other people need access to the spreadsheet, please let us know. We can add them and authorize them for access. But apart from that, it'll only be a limited number of people within NoiseNet that have access to the spreadsheet. We ask, if possible, if you can keep it on the portal, and we do that because we're interested in gathering data about how you're using the service, how you expect the service to make savings for you, and to understand about the scope and size of the noise nuisance issues you're facing. We hope over the course of time, where we get multiple councils filling in this data, we'll actually be able to generate some stats from it, and we'll be able to include that in a conference presentation at some point to share some information across different groups. So jumping into the spreadsheet, it should open up either in the Excel application if you have it, or for those who do not, you should be able to get access via a web tool, and the spreadsheet will work in either case. So it doesn't really matter which way you're using it. It should look and behave pretty similar. So the fundamental of this spreadsheet is it's about your information. You'll see that the spreadsheet is populated when you receive it. We will have your council name, the population in your local government area based on the last census data, and predictions based on go-bys that we've generated in discussion with some other users of our service. Now, that's not to say that it's going to be the same. Some councils have more dogs per population, some people or some areas there's a lot more noise issues. So your figures are your figures. So this is not trying to lead you, it's just got some beginning figures that you can work with. So as we step through the spreadsheet, you'll see at the beginning your council name. The validation out to the right is really just telling us that our system's got the right council population. And the way we use the spreadsheet, we've got three different types of cells. So green cells are ones that we want you to be entering data. Like I said, we have filled this out already with go-by information to give you an idea of what the answers are likely to be around. Not to say they're correct, but you know, if we've got 25% in there and you think it's 90, it's probably a suggestion that either we or you have misinterpreted and might be worth thinking about a little bit more. So green, we try and fill in. Blue cells are calculated cells, but you may choose to change those values. In fact, I'm just going to make a really quick change because this is not the latest version of the spreadsheet. So I just had to make a slight change there. So blue cells have a formula in them, but you can overwrite them. Now, what we would prefer is if you look at, for instance, the number of complaints per year, that is your population, 107,000, multiplied by 0.6%, which is an indicator that we've found from a number of councils in Queensland. If that's too high, we'd suggest you change that number, the green cell, to get the right number in the blue cell. And that's just for consistency of the spreadsheet. Otherwise, you'll get numbers that don't make sense. If that stays at 0.6 and this ends up at 200, probably when it gets in front of an accountant to be assessed, they're going to go, your figures do not add up, and you'll end up having to redo things. So try and stick with changing the green cells, but if it's getting too complicated, you can change the blue ones. All right, so what I'm going to do now is a quick overview. So what we're doing is we're putting in a certain baseline data here that we've put in that gives you a little bit of information about how we have generated a price list for you and what the tier 1 plan looks like for you. Now, to keep things simple, we have just financially assessed the use of tier 1. And we've done that because we believe that the greatest benefits come from using the system in that mode. Now, that's not to say that you have to stick with that or that's the only way you can go forward. Of course, it's up to you how you use our service, whether it's occasionally hiring a device or regularly using it for the majority of cases needing investigation. But to do the model, we've just set it up as one setting. If you particularly would like an assessment against tier 2, get in touch with us. We can slightly modify the tool to adjust it so that it'll work in that way. So that first yellow zone is sort of baseline data and information about how the service is used as we anticipate it in a tier 1 mode. The second section, which is in grey, is the current costs of managing noise nuisance at your council. So this is forgetting NoiseNet. This is nothing to do with how we operate. What we're looking at here is information about your performance pre-NoiseNet. So how long does it normally take you to close out a case? Specifically those that need investigation, i.e. you've got a diary back and you have to deal with it. And information about the number of calls that come in via your call centre, the hours per officer per case in terms of work to maintain and sustain those cases. Are you spending overtime on closing these cases out with people door knocking in evenings or spending time out listening to noise at night? And we also look into the legal costs. So this gives us the cost of your your managing noise currently on a monthly basis. Then in orange, we've got a section which is relating to how the NoiseNet service being used as tier 1, i.e. being regularly used for early stage investigations, plus being used with reports for later stage closeout and enforcement actions as needed. And so what we're looking at is how much faster are you going to be able to close cases? How many less hours per month are you going to spend in terms of ranger hours per case? Is it going to impact your overtime? We know several councils that have just stopped overtime completely. So that would be 100% reduction. Others have done some reductions. Others don't spend overtime, so there'd be no benefit. And then we also get some stats around legal cases, if you do get involved with legal cases or not. And that varies state by state. Certainly WA, South Australia tends to have more of that than Queensland, and Queensland tends to have a little more than New South Wales and Victoria. So everywhere is going to be a little bit different. And having entered that information in there, what we're going to see is a set of results that are determined down here. And I've just seen another error in my spreadsheet. These ones here should not be green for entry. So I'll fix that before you see the spreadsheet. Okay. So that's the basic overview, and what you're going to get at the end of that process is an indicator of what you're spending now per month to manage noise nuisance, what you will spend in the future with NoiseNet per month, and thus a monthly saving and an annual saving. Now, particularly for smaller councils where the cost may be similar, but the number of cases you have is lower, this number may end up negative. In other words, we're not actually making a saving. So in those cases, it's going to be a decision for you to say the cost of managing noise nuisance better will be $3,000 a year or $10,000 a year. And you'll need to look then at the financial or the non-financial benefits associated with that. In some cases, we see councils that are extremely good at avoiding having to investigate cases. So your forms are harder to find. You tend to have high burdens for complainants before cases get investigated. And so in those cases, you're going to see potentially a relatively low cost to begin with. And that will tend to mean that NoiseNet is not as economically viable because you've got an economic solution now. But in those cases, you may not be providing the best service to your residents. And so NoiseNet's benefit will, in those cases, may be more significant around the non-financial benefits. So every case is different, and we're not trying to tell you how to do this or how things are going to work for you, but it's meant to be a tool that helps you quantify and assess and play with options and ultimately make better decisions. And then when you're ready with the right decision for you, being able to communicate that really effectively to management, to your accounting team, and therefore being able to progress forward and ultimately improve the way you operate. So that's the short form. Moving forward, I'm just going to walk through an example in a little more detail that will help understand or help you understand the process and the definitions at a line-by-line level. So if you feel like you've got enough information, that's all you need now. As we go into the second half of the video, we'll just go in and look at the individual line items in a little more detail. So to begin with, as we said, council name, council size. Now, these are 2016 census figures. You've probably got more up-to-date numbers, so feel free to adjust that. As we said, you know your complaints per year. So you can enter the value there, or you can put in the percentage here to make that match correctly. Now, we use a couple of go-bys that indicate the number of complaints that need to be addressed. So what we're talking about there is if you get 10 complaints a month and you send out a note, you ask for a diary to come back, and at that point you're going to start investigating. If 3 out of those 10 come back with a diary, that would be 30%. Okay, so that's going to say that 642 complaints per year becomes 193 cases per 12 months. And I'm going to change this one as well. We'll say 0.4%. Oh, sorry, gone to the wrong cell. 0.4% of the population will make a complaint each year. Right, so that gives us 128 addressable complaints per year, and that gives us 64 per 6 months. Now, we use 6 months because our prepay contracts are generally defined around a 6-month period. So, yeah, it seems a little funny we jump between monthly, annually, and every 6 months, but this section here is defined around the prepaid contract. Now, our tier 1 pricing is based on the assumption that around 58% of those cases that are addressable will end up having monitoring with our device in a dashboard mode. Okay, so not all of them will get monitored because, as you know, some of them drop away, some of them the person may provide you with compelling evidence, some of them you actually start investigating, you can hear the dog clear as day and it's clearly a nuisance. So this is the figure that we've gathered from a number of our customers. We've taken an average there. That could be higher, that could be lower. I'm just going to go with 50% on this occasion. All right. And then from that dashboard monitoring, and I'll just jump down. So what we're saying is that the average duration that the device is in the field for dashboard monitoring is 5 days. We have some customers that average at 3 days. We have some customers that average at 7 days. If you always want to include a weekend, maybe you put 7 in there. If you want to try and do a more rapid fire 2 or 3 days per install, adjust that number as you need. And from that average duration, we're going to use that later to determine how many devices are in the field. The second measure is of those cases, so we're now down to 32 cases that are going to have dashboard monitoring per 6 months in any town. We see around 1 in 6, based on the last 6 months of all of our customers across Australia, around 1 in 6 dashboard placements end up getting a report. Now, some customers never get reports and use dashboard extensively. Others, every second job they request a report. Again, it's up to you. It depends on the legislation you're working with, depends on your confidence in the accuracy of our dashboards. Again, it's up to you. But that's a good go by in the first instance. And, if it turns out you're using more reports, we can bump that up. And this will be a tool that you can use on an annual basis as well. So as we go further on, we can fine tune that. And then again, we want to enter down here the duration for, in terms of days of monitoring, when a device is going in with the intent of getting a report. Now, we've put 14 days in there because that's our recommendation. It's 2 weeks, it's 2 weekends, it captures people who might be doing FIFO or have shifts or whatever. We are seeing a trend to shorten those durations, that while that may be the intent to have 14 days, a lot of the time people can see from the dashboard that within 7 days they've got what they need and they say, right, we need the report now, we're going to close this out quickly. So maybe 14 is a bit of an overestimation. Now, the next measure is helping us determine, or helping you determine, how many devices you need in the field. And the longer you have the device in the field per case, the greater demand there is for devices. The other factor that drives that is the utilization of the devices. So if you've got 2 devices, if you're only half the time you've actually got them out in the field, then your utilization would be 50%. If you're taking the device directly from one address to the next address, and you're only losing an hour between, you're going to have a utilization close to 100%. So you can make a pick. Now, we've currently got 75% in there. We only have a couple of customers that achieve that. That is our benchmark. So generally it will tend to be a little bit lower than that. But, it's up to you to decide what you think is reasonable. In terms of the justification, if you put in a lower number, it will make the NoiseNet service more expensive, and thus it will make the efficiency of the service lower, or the financial viability of the service lower. So, you need to think about that. But equally, you need to think about how big a priority is this? Do we have the resources to be able to keep them moving continuously, and so on? Places in some of our customers in WA are looking at getting their security services to deploy the devices. And because they're working every night and don't have a lot of duties other than driving around being on patrol, they are going to be capable of getting 100% utilisation. Doing the install in the 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. each night. They're already spending that money, so it's effectively free. In other places, this is your time driving out, driving back, and so on. Okay, so that gives us an estimate of costs. Now, it does say at tier 1 level there. That is based on the original numbers that we've put in. Okay, so that isn't necessarily your tier 1 pricing threshold. It was at the beginning. By the time you've changed those numbers, it will be something slightly differently. But it gives you an idea of what you're going to be spending in that council for 6 months worth of services. And we also put in a small contingency number there, which is basically covering the potential you might need to redo a report. You might want us to do some special analysis. Just some occasional extra costs that some customers incur. Most don't actually incur any other costs. They hire the devices, they have report costs. But, we've put a number in there. You can play with that as you see needed. Okay, so that brings us down to a prediction of the cost of using the NoiseNet service, and you can go from there. The second section is looking at managing the noise nuisance. So based on the number of complaints that you're having at an addressable level, we've used that as an input into this section of the spreadsheet. And what we're putting is an input that in most cases you should be able to access relatively easily, and that is the mean duration to close cases. Important that we are talking here about investigation cases only. If you look at all of your cases, you see someone raises a complaint. If you don't hear anything more from, you send the stuff out. If you don't hear anything more from them and you close it after a month, that's going to skew the figures incorrectly low, and it's going to make our service look extremely inefficient and not viable. What we're interested in is where NoiseNet is going to be used, and that's on the investigation cases only. So for those where you've got a diary back, you've got to go and do some investigation. How long is it from the original raise of the complaint to the closure of the complaint on average? Now we've got 4.5 months in there. That is quite fast. There are many councils that are in the 5, 6, even out to 8 month number. In fact, I'm aware of a few councils that have a 6-month waiting list before they even start investigating because they have such a backlog of cases. So from the number of cases being raised, the average duration, that tells you on average how many cases do you have open. And you can do a reality check yourself, open up the folder, how many cases do you have there at the moment? It should be in the order of that number. And you'll have a gut feel for that at any one time. Do I have 10 cases open? Do I have 12? Do I have 50? So that's a bit of a reality check. Again, we're talking about investigation cases. This isn't the early stage stuff. Okay. Now, every case that is open creates work. You have a complainant, you have an animal owner. Both of them may be communicating with the council, interacting with rangers, interacting with the call centre, and so on. So what we're doing now is looking at the individual costs for those different things. So what we're saying here is, or what we're asking here is, how many calls to the call centre do you receive per case per month? Okay, and so an average open case, they're going to call you somewhere between 2 and 3 times a month to follow up in some way. It's going to sit in the queue on the call centre. Someone's going to answer it. They've got to find the ranger or officer in question, put them through. Sometimes you're not available, so there'll be another repeat call and so on. So that's giving you a number of calls and a total number of calls per month. And again, you can go to your call centre and say, how many dog barking calls did you get per month, and see if that is a reasonable reality check. Now, again, we've got to remember there are investigation cases and then there are early raise cases. So you need to split those two. Again, we're talking about the investigation cases here. The other measure is, what does it cost to handle a call? And not every council is going to have that information, but generally you can ask whichever section that is responsible for managing the call centre. Often they're centralised and it's contracted, and you actually will have a clear cost, but put in that figure for however long the call is. And it's, you know, it's usually not much longer than a few minutes, but there's a cost to it. So you want to throw that one in. The second one is, or the next section is looking at the ranger or animal management officer. How many hours of their time are they spending per case per month? Now, this can be skewed a little bit. If you've got a lot of cases, you might be actively working on 20 and you might have 30 sitting in the queue and you're not really working on them. So it is important that we're looking at the average. So, you know, you play with those numbers based on what your feeling is, and at the bottom here, you're going to get an indicator of the total hours per month that you're spending per, across the team. So again, investigation cases only, and, 40 hours in a week normally, or 38 hours in a week. So how many people do you have working on it? That should give you an indicator. If you've just got one person doing investigation, 40 hours per week, you should be looking at a total hours number at around about 160. So that's a reality check to make sure that you've got a decent number there. Again, now we've got a cost of that person in terms of salary. So we're looking at salaries, on costs, admin costs, all of those sorts of things. So it isn't just base salary. We're looking at all of the add-ons associated with having that person on your team. And you should have a budget figure available for that. Or if you don't have it, when you send this to the accountants, you can say, hey, can you fill in these cells for me? The next one is, of those hours above, what percentage of those are overtime? And, you probably have a good handle on what that overtime number is. You adjust that number so that that looks realistic. And what we're looking at here is the extra costs associated with overtime. It is not the total cost of overtime. It's the difference between the normal rate and the overtime rate that we're looking at here. So that, that should be fairly clear in the award of whoever is working on it. The next section is looking at legal cases. Again, we're working with percentages to get some go-bys, but you probably have a good enough idea of how many cases, and you probably need to look back a few years because they're not always that common and sometimes they happen in a spurt. But yeah, if you look back over the last 2-3 years, see how many cases you've got, change that percentage until that number is reflected accurately. And then the next one is, what is the average cost of a legal case? So that is your time, lawyer's time, any work associated with engaging with ombudsman, and you need to include the costs of wins and losses. So if you've ended up having to make a payout or pay somebody else's court costs because of a loss, that comes into that figure. And that's entered there as the cost per case. So again, if you've looked back over 5 years and you've got 3 cases over 5 years, and you've spent a total of 60,000 over that time, your average cost is going to be 20,000 per case. Obviously, if you get a win and somebody else is paying your costs, those numbers will be lower. But there are some costs that you can't recover. So the officer that's involved in managing that case and so on your side isn't chargeable. So those figures together give us a monthly legal cost, an annual legal cost here, and then out to the right a monthly legal cost. And a total here of, in this case, $12,500 per month to manage nuisance animal noise. And these are, again, the investigation cases. We've got another total out here in the lighter grey, and that is just looking at the direct costs. So this is excluding labour savings. And we put that one in because some organisations, the council's going to say, we'll only let you count labour savings if you're going to point at the officer that we're going to get rid of to save that money. And, we all know that work expands to fill the available space, and there's always good things for additional staff to do. It's always an optimisation case. We're not here to try and get rid of jobs from your teams. We want people to be able to focus on the critical issues and to be more efficient in what they're doing. So if your accounting team is not going to let you include labour cost savings, then this is the number that you have to use. And obviously it's harder for us to show a financial benefit of the service if we're excluding one of the areas where there are significant savings. All right, the second section, this is pretty straightforward. So the first one is duration to close. Now, anyone who's at this stage in the assessment process has carried out a trial with the NoiseNet service. Maybe it's too early for you to really make an assessment, but like anything when it comes to management decisions, sometimes you have to make decisions based on suboptimal information. And being conservative isn't always the best way to go. You need to be reasonable with your estimates, but so what we're looking at here is saying by using NoiseNet, again, thinking the tier 1 mode, so as soon as the investigation needs to commence, you're putting the device in relatively quickly and you're getting results back within a week. Then, for those cases that persist, you might be putting it back in later for a week to 14 days. And then you've got your report coming in 10 days later than that. How is that going to affect how long it takes you to close out cases? So in this case, we've got 35% reduction in duration as a baseline. Some councils, particularly those that are using it in tier 1 and using it extensively, are reporting 50% or even greater reductions in the duration. So you put the number in there that you feel comfortable with. And you can also play sensitivity with it. What's the savings if we get 30? What if we get 50? What if we get 70? So you get a feel for what's really going to make a difference. The next one is looking at the range of time per case that you're going to see saved per month. Now, you have to remember, if we're halving the duration to close, you're still probably working reasonably hard on the case during that time. So you're not likely to see a 50% reduction there and a 50% reduction there. They might, to an extent, counteract each other. But, there's certainly some efficiencies associated with the system. Obviously, you're going to have to drive out and drop the device to install it. You're going to have to go and collect it or relocate it to the next place. So there's a certain amount of work involved, interpreting the results. You're still communicating with the animal owner. You're still communicating with the complainant. So, you make the assessment on how much time it's going to save. Overtime, if you have any overtime, you want to put in the percentage adjustment as a result of that, whether it's a 10% reduction, whether it's a 100% reduction, i.e. you won't do any more night monitoring with officers out in the field. That one's pretty straightforward. And then the next two relate to legal costs. So the first one is the reduction in the number of cases that get into the legal sphere. And the second one is a reduction in the legal costs per case. Now, unfortunately, we don't have great go-by information in this area. What we do know is that very few of the cases that we have expected to go into or we've been told by our clients are going to go into legal proceedings actually end up going into legal proceedings. The majority of them, when the legal quality report hits the table, the animal owner realises they've been called out and pretty well decides that a legal course is not going to be the way to go. So we have seen pretty significant reductions there. I've only put 50% in there. My gut feel is it's probably closer to 90% from what we've seen with customers to date. And then the next component is, what is the reduction in legal costs per case? And you need to consider that in several ways. So number one, because you've got better evidence, does that reduce the spend you have on your lawyers? Plus, if you're getting a better win rate, that's going to reduce the costs of legal for you, because it's going to be the complainant who ends up paying or not the complainant, the animal owner who's going to end up paying legal costs if they want to challenge or contest. And actually it could be the complainant. They sometimes take people to court as well. So the reductions there are reasonably appreciable. And again, the fact that we've seen 90% of cases not going to trial, and of those few that have gone to trial, in our knowledge, they have all settled prior to, either settled or they've changed their plea prior to the case closing. So those numbers are fairly substantial. Obviously, if you're not taking cases into the courts, then you're not getting a benefit. But remember, ombudsman review, involvement in mediation processes, any of those things can also apply in that case. All right. So having done those analyses, we now come down to the results. So what we call the future costs using NoiseNet at a tier 1 level. And so now you have a new mean duration to closure. You have a new average open cases, which hopefully is smaller. And all of these stats are revised based on the original numbers and these percentages, and the formulas are all there, so they can be checked by yourselves or your accounting team as required. And ultimately, that then gives you an indicator. And what I've also got in here is the cost of the NoiseNet service based on the calculations that we've done up at the top here. So that gives you an overall total monthly cost, total monthly savings, and in this case, a set of annual savings, which in this case has shown up at $71,000 per annum. So what that's telling you is, when you go into budget discussions, you can say, by using NoiseNet, we're going to save $10,700 in other expenses. So that's the legal, the call center, overtime, predominantly costs. And in total, if you include labor savings, it's going to save us $71,000 a year. So you are saving money. It's not a new budget line item. It is a saving. And then on top of that, you're getting all of these non-financial benefits. Your faster closing of cases, which is good for you, but it's also good for complainants. It's good for animal owners. That period of stress while something's still being sorted out, the shorter you make it, the better it is. You've got better evidence to back up you reducing the likelihood of recurrence. If people know the process, they know it's fact-based, you're less likely to get these spurious or neighbour complaints. They're going to find another way to get at their neighbour rather than using you as a proxy. It is a faster and fairer way of resolving cases, and ultimately it improves community noise environment. So noise is a nuisance. Noise affects people's health. It affects people's well-being. It affects people's enjoyment of life. if we're able to fix and solve these problems faster and more definitively and more fact-based, you have a healthier, happier community. Obviously, there's a humane aspect. A barking dog is often not a happy dog, and so by being able to deal with that more quickly and more efficiently, we can address those issues where they're applicable. And for you, there's a health, safety, security benefit. We're eliminating nighttime work or dramatically reducing it. The security aspects of having rangers sitting out in trucks outside properties at night and or dealing with complainants or animal owners at these times, by reducing that, we're making safer, and from just a work-life balance, people can be home with their families in the evening rather than out in the truck waiting for a dog to bark. So yeah, that's the overall picture. And then just for your information, there's a little bit of a breakdown here, just showing you where the benefits are coming from. So the call centre is generally small fry. Your labour savings is pretty significant. Overtime can be very significant, but depends how much overtime you're using. I mean, some places don't use any yet to begin with, so there won't be savings. And again, the legal savings are going to vary depending on where you start. So particularly WA, to a lesser extent South Australia, and less again in Queensland. These are relatively material numbers in Victoria and New South Wales, where generally it's up to complainants to do the court stuff themselves. You're not going to see the same level of savings. However, in those cases, you'll provide, or you've got the ability now to provide a service that can solve these problems without the residents having to resort to going to court and tackling in those ways. So that's the overview. Hopefully it's helpful. As I said at the beginning, this is here to help you. It's using your data. It's to help you understand, inform and communicate internally, to set your budgets and to justify the use of our servers. We know, and I can just quickly model it, that if you're a smaller council, so if I put a population of 15,000 in any town, let's say we had a big exodus, everyone moved north for the winter and decided not to come back, we're going to see the number of cases and the durations all reduce. And what we'll find in that case is that the savings are a lot smaller. In this case, it's just a couple of $1,000s that ultimately is going to be saved across the course of a year. And if you exclude the labour costs, it's actually not a saving. So there is an external cost. You need to look at this. You need to decide if the service is of use to you. Remember, this is tier 1. If you go with a tier 2 or a base tier solution, you do have the opportunity to cherry pick where the benefits occur. Obviously, the cost of our service is going to reduce in those cases where you're using it less, but some of the benefits will be reduced also. We don't have enough data to talk about the proportionality. The reality being we have very few customers operating at tier 2. People tend to play with the service a little bit and stay at that level and then jump to tier 1 because that's the most economic way to operate. But over time, hopefully we will build up the background data to be able to model that tier 2. And as I said before, if you've got any issues, any questions, you want to try a different scenario, please get in touch. We're here to help, and hope that this is going to save you some time and is going to help you make the best decisions for your council. So thank you very much.